The heiress of a large corporation decides to secretly check on her employees by taking a job as a cleaner in her own company. But an overheard conversation turns her life upside down and jeopardizes everything she believes in. Adeline Stone sat in the semi-dark living room of her late father's mansion, Arthur Stone, on the outskirts of Boston. Outside the window, a cold fall rain drummed on the glass, and wood crackled in the fireplace. She was about to learn about the will that would determine her future and the future of Stone and Company. Logistics company her father had founded years ago. The lawyer had been patiently leafing through the papers for 3 minutes now, glancing occasionally at his watch. Finally, he cleared his throat and turned to Adeline. "Ms. Stone, I offer you my sincere condolences. Your father had great respect for you and relied on your intelligence and virtue. I will read to you the last paragraphs of his will." Adeline nodded, trying to remain calm. She seemed to be used to the blows of fate after losing her mother at an early age. But now, hearing the lawyer's serious voice, the girl felt a slight tremor in her hands. "I, Arthur Stone, of sound mind and firm judgment, transfer all ownership and management of Stone & Co. to my only daughter, Adeline Stone." The lawyer looked at her over his glasses. "I have faith in her ability to lead our family and our business to prosperity. I ask her to maintain the principles of integrity and honorability that have always guided me." The words honesty and nobility sounded especially loud in the silence. Adeline knew how important these qualities were in the American business community, where responsibility to partners and employees was paramount. Her father had tried to adhere to those values, though he often encountered people who had very different principles. "Minus Ms. Stone," the lawyer said, turning the page. "Your father also wanted you to pay special attention to the company's personnel policies. He emphasized that the future of the company depended on people." Adeline sighed heavily as the lawyer finished reading. She had a daughter, Jessica, an 18-year-old girl who dreamed of a career in marketing. After her grandfather's death, Jessica often recalled how he had taught her to feel a sense of responsibility to the team, but Adeline wasn't sure she could bear the burden herself. "Thank you," she said quietly to the lawyer as he handed her a copy of the will. "I'll try to live up to my father's expectations." When the lawyer left, Adeline was alone in the living room. Her head was literally buzzing with thoughts about the future of the company. Competitors, directors, shareholders, and most importantly, the hundreds of employees who had relied on her father's decisions. Now they would be relying on her. A thought that at first seemed crazy came to mind. To pretend to be the most inconspicuous person in the office. To find out what the people she was going to entrust the future of Stone & Cobras were breathing. Ever since she was a kid, she'd loved experimenting with costumes and makeup. Why not use it in a real business? But why take the risk? Why take such a gamble? The answer came up on its own. If she took the president's seat directly, all the employees would start acting contrived, and detractors would lurk. As a result, she would not be able to know the true state of affairs. Also, the company has a CEO, Joshua Calloway, a man with excellent references but rumored to be rather rigid in his methods. Her father had a great relationship with him, but Adeline didn't know yet if she could trust this man. She took her cloak off the chair, went to the window, and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The rain was still falling. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. She realized that she had no choice. Either find out the truth or live in ignorance, hoping that everything would go smoothly on its own. But her father had never been a coward. Neither would she allow herself to live a life of lies and illusions. The next day, she pulled herself together and summoned the nearest au pair, Mrs. Horn. This gray-haired woman had moved from New York with Adeline and Arthur Stone years ago. She looked after the house while Adeline led an active social life. When Adeline's daughter was born, Mrs. Horn became something of an auntie to little Jessica, always ready to help with advice and advice. "It's so hard for you, dear," Mrs. Horn said softly, when she saw Adeline's eyes red with tears. "But remember, Mr. Kid, Stone believed in you. He knew you wouldn't betray the company." "I'm not going to betray it," Adeline exhaled. But I'm afraid I don't know the pitfalls. I want to conceal my identity for a while and join my own company. Say, as a cleaner or a maintenance assistant." Mrs. Horn's mouth dropped open in amazement, but she quickly pulled herself together. "And how do you intend to do that?" "I have a few ideas. I just need to find the right uniform and do a little makeup. Plus, I'm hoping that not many people have seen me in person over the years. People know me as the heiress, but I've hardly ever appeared at public company events. I think that will play to my advantage." "It does. Your father often avoided unnecessary photos of you to keep you out of the media spotlight. So the chances of me being recognized are slim. Mrs. Horn, will you help me?" There was a slight spark of excitement in the older woman's eyes. "Of course, dear." They discussed the details at length. How Adeline would look, how to speak, and how to avoid personal contact with top management. 2 days later, she already had a set of work clothes, and an ash-colored wig and sunglasses completed the image of a modest cleaning lady named Sandy. As the preparations went on, Adeline felt something between fear and excitement. She was well aware that the reputation of not only the company, but the entire Stone family was at stake. But she was determined to find out if there were any people in her new kingdom who wanted to undermine the business. Early the following Monday morning, Adeline entered the gleaming Stone & Company building through the back entrance. In her hands, she clutched a pass in the name of Sandy Brown, the new employee of the cleaning crew. The turnstile clicked, and she found herself in a lobby where men and women in smart suits went about their business. No one paid much attention to Sandy. Her heart was pounding with adrenaline. This was all too strange. She would have to be careful not to run into her daughter Jessica and be recognized early. Jessica had recently moved from Los Angeles back to Boston and was about to start an internship at Stone & Company, at her late grandfather's urging and her own initiative. In the hallway, Adeline saw a familiar face in an expensive suit. Joshua Calloway, interim CEO. Tall, trim, with impeccable hair, he radiated confidence. Yet his eyes were dark with the signs of sleep deprivation, and the tense line of his lips spoke of stress. "Good morning, Mr. Calloway," his secretary called to him as she passed him with a cup of coffee. "Good morning," he replied briefly, not even glancing at the cleaning lady who stood beside him with a bucket and mop. Adeline mentally calmed herself. Don't draw attention. Don't overreact. She needed to keep a low profile, observe and gather intelligence. Soon she was immersed in the endless scrubbing of floors, dusting and discreetly eavesdropping on conversations, not on purpose, but because almost everyone in the office spoke in a low voice as long as no one important was standing nearby. By mid-afternoon, she had already gotten a sense of how hard her journey was going to be. Her legs and back ached, and her soul was torn by the realization that this was all just the beginning. "Hold on, Adeline," she whispered to herself. "For her father's sake, and for the sake of everyone who works here." In one of the corridors, she suddenly heard a clipped phrase from behind a closed door. "Ms. Stone's daughter has no idea what she's getting into. I'll squeeze everything I need out of her, and then—" The voice was male, low and angry. Adeline froze. Ms. Stone's daughter. That meant it was talking about Jessica. But who? And why speak in that tone of voice? Her heart hammered harder. She stepped closer, but the door suddenly opened. A man in a suit came out of the room, whose face Adeline did not have time to see. He was too preoccupied with his thoughts and almost collided with the cleaning lady. "Careful," he said gruffly and disappeared around the corner. Adeline was speechless for a moment. Is someone plotting something against Jessica? Shock and hopelessness came over her in a wave. She wanted to drop the mop and run after the man to demand an explanation. But she knew she couldn't give herself away right now. She had to be smarter and more careful. So, at the end of her first day in the office, she already felt she had too little evidence on her hands, but too many questions. And chief among them was how to protect Jessica without exposing herself. The next day, Adeline arrived at the office before anyone else. The security guard on duty at the entrance slid her an indifferent glance. Inside the building, there was a sleepy silence. Adeline glanced at her watch. 6 in the morning. The staff wouldn't start filling the hallways until 8. She hoped to have time to check out some of the public records that were kept open for the staff. Needed to figure out which managers were best to stay away from and who interacted directly with Jessica. Settling at an inconspicuous table in one of the empty tech staff offices, Adeline pulled out her laptop. She was to log into the corporate database under a temporary login issued by HR for those in maintenance. But she had a limited amount of time before the rest of the cleaning staff and office staff showed up. She started looking at the management structure. Robert Lewis, Chief Financial Officer. Barbara Jones, Director of Human Resources. Joshua Calloway, Acting General Manager. Eric Fallon, Head of Marketing. Angela Spencer, Director of Development. All the top people at the company who supported or oversaw key processes. Adeline had seen these names in her father's reports, but she knew only Joshua personally. He had always appeared to her as an extremely competent and trustworthy man, but now, remembering the strange conversation at the door, she couldn't help thinking that he might have been involved in the intrigue as well. At 7 in the morning, the first employees began to pull into the office. Adeline shut down her laptop and hurried to the restroom to grab a mop and continue her legitimate cleaning job. An hour later, she happened to run into Jessica in the hallway. The daughter, as expected, didn't recognize her mother under her thick wig and glasses. Jessica smiled slightly at Sandy, letting her pass her forward. "Excuse me," the girl said and nodded, delicately indicating that she needed to make her way to the elevator. Adeline stepped back, a warm feeling in her heart as her daughter looked alert and determined. Jessica was not a spoiled heiress. She tried her best to succeed on her own. That always pleased Adeline, and her father, Arthur Stone, was especially proud of his granddaughter. However, remembering the conversation she had overheard yesterday, Adeline felt uneasy. She continued down the hallway, taking in the faces of the staff. For a moment, she thought one of the men in a suit was looking at her too closely, but she quickly looked away. Meanwhile, Jessica was on her way to the marketing department where she planned to intern under Eric Fallon. From her brief phone conversation with him, she realized that he was a tough but fair manager who demanded full commitment from his interns. It suited her, because Jessica was eager to prove that she could work as well as the experienced employees. "Good morning, Ms. Stone," Eric said when he saw Jessica at his door. "Come in and have a seat. I hope you're ready for a busy day." "Absolutely," she smiled. "Good. Then let's start with the basic plan for the week. We have a big launch of a new advertising package next month. We need a fresh set of eyes, so I want to hear your opinions as well." As they discussed the details, Jessica tried to memorize the department structure, key clients, and expected project timelines. She realized that any omission could create tension with her supervisor. On her lunch break, as she left Eric's office, Jessica saw Mr. Calloway in the hallway. He approached her, smiling. "Jessica, good to see you've already started your duties. How are your first impressions?" She felt slightly embarrassed. "Good afternoon, Mr. Calloway. It's going great. Eric is bringing me up to speed. I'm very grateful to be given the opportunity to prove myself." "Glad to hear it." Joshua nodded and leaned toward her, lowering his voice slightly. "If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'm always available." Jessica noted to herself that his friendliness seemed sincere, but still something in his gaze made her wary. Perhaps she was racked with worry over her grandfather's death, or perhaps it was intuition. Adeline, in her usual Sandy persona, was walking by with a trash bag and noticed Joshua talking to her daughter. An incomprehensible annoyance pricked her heart. She suddenly remembered that the voice of the man she had heard outside the door could have belonged to Joshua. Or not. She wasn't sure, because the sound was muffled by the walls. But suspicions were still awakening. Can't blame him without proof, Adeline thought. But we can't leave Jessica in the dark either. After lunch, Adeline summoned her will and headed for Joshua Calloway's office. She needed to find at least the slightest clue or hear something important. After all, if he was up to no good, he might let it slip. She carefully walked past the secretary, who was just distracted by a phone call. Joshua's office was closed, but voices could be heard inside. Adeline listened, trying not to breathe. "We have no margin for error," Calloway said to someone. "I'm meeting with the board of shareholders tomorrow at 10, and if anything comes up before the time—" "I understand, Mr. Calloway, but you must also remember that Ms. Stone is the mistress now." "Adeline?" Calloway chuckled briefly. "She hasn't been here in years. Do you think she's going to suddenly burst in and start giving orders?" "I don't have anything to worry about yet." Adeline felt a chill inside. He spoke of her as someone who could be easily bypassed in matters. But so far, she hadn't heard anything that confirmed her fears about a specific threat to Jessica. "We need to find a way to eavesdrop or ferret out more," she decided. But then the door started to open. Adeline jumped back against the wall, pretending to unload a cart of cleaning supplies. An unfamiliar middle-aged man stepped out of the office. Mr. Calloway appeared over his shoulder. Both glimpsed the cleaning lady and walked toward the elevators. Adeline exhaled. She was about to be caught eavesdropping. She realized that it was too dangerous to continue acting alone. Someone in the company was clearly intent on playing their own game. But to dig up concrete facts, she needed reliable helpers. When Adeline returned to the mansion that night, Mrs. Horn was waiting for her. She had brought tea into the living room, where the table lamp was already burning. "Well, how was your day, dear?" she asked, setting the cup on the table. "Difficult." Adeline sat down on the sofa, taking off her wig and fixing her disheveled hair. "I found out that Joshua isn't expecting me to show up. He's sure I won't get into things. I've also heard about some mysterious intentions regarding Jessica. Someone's going to squeeze her, but I don't know who yet. Could it be Calloway himself? Maybe. Although the voice outside the door sounded different, rougher. I'm not sure. But all indications are that there's at least one person in leadership who's willing to act against me and my daughter. So what are you going to do? Well, for starters, keep it up, but be careful. And get help from someone else who can legally request documents, conduct surveillance. I am, after all, a janitor. I have limited access." "I understand." "Mrs. Stone, are you sure you want to put yourself in that kind of danger?" Adeline looked at her reflection in the living room mirror. She didn't see a young girl, but a woman who had struggled through life. "I'm sure. If I don't figure this out, it could end up worse." And she plunged into thinking about how to pull off this covert operation without too much noise and risk to Jessica. It had been several days since Adeline, disguised as Sandy, had taken up residence in the Stone and Company office. She managed to appear in the right places at the right time, eavesdropped on fragments of negotiations, and observed the behavior of top managers. At the same time, she did not forget about her direct task, to keep the premises clean and not to arouse suspicion. One morning, while she was mopping the floor in the hallway in front of the HR office, Barbara Jones, the head of the HR department, appeared. A tall woman in her early 40s with a stern look that seemed to pierce through people. Barbara stopped at the door and said to the secretary, "Get Mr. Calloway right away. We have a paperwork problem on a new trainee." Adeline became wary. A new intern. Perhaps it's Jessica we're talking about. She remembered that her daughter had enrolled specifically as an intern in the marketing department. Perhaps some formality had not been observed. But what did Barbara fear? A few minutes later, Mr. Calloway approached. He and Barbara disappeared into the office, and Adeline, having finished cleaning up the hallway, decided to sneak in quietly behind them. She opened the door ajar, trying to remain unnoticed. There were blinds inside, but there was a narrow gap between the slats. "Jessica Stone's papers were incomplete," Barbara said. "I've been trying to contact her, but she's not answering." "What? Incomplete?" Calloway was clearly nervous. What could it be? "It seems we didn't get her resume approved when we processed the internship. The problem is that she's already been cleared for the job, and without that packet of paperwork, we could be accused of not following procedures." "Resumes?" Calloway interjected. "I thought that was all taken care of." "It is, and now I don't understand who let her in without the proper paperwork. If this gets out, Joshua, we'll be the first ones to get blamed. Calloway paced the office, suppressing his irritation. We need to find out who's responsible and solve the problem. Jessica is the heiress, and we can't let a scandal start to blow up around her. Adeline could feel her muscles tensing. She was tempted to go in and tell her she was the mother and she'd fix it. But no, it was too soon to reveal herself. Barbara straightened her back. Okay, I'll contact her personally as soon as she shows up. Hopefully everything will be cleared up. Good. Calloway nodded, glancing at his watch. Anything else? Yes. We're still waiting for a decision from the heiress on the major personnel changes. Don't forget that the Shareholders' Council is waiting for us to explain why the chairmanship is still vacant. As I said, Adeline Stone is in no hurry to take her father's chair, and until she does, we will run the company as we see fit. With those words, he headed for the door, and Adeline barely had time to skulk to the side to avoid his gaze. They're looking for a way to keep Jessica in line, and I'm not being fully recognized, she thought. Meanwhile, Jessica herself was also in a state of anxiety. She hadn't received any messages from HR and didn't suspect any problems with the paperwork. But her gut told her that something was going wrong in the company, whether it was because of the tense atmosphere in the department or some unspoken pressure. On her lunch break, Jessica found time to grab a coffee in the small cafeteria on the second floor. Angela Spencer, the director of development, unexpectedly sat down with her. A young, energetic woman known for her openness. Jessica knew her from conversations with her grandfather. Angela wasn't afraid to champion bold ideas, and Arthur Stone sometimes praised her American entrepreneurial spirit. Hello, Jessica. May I join you? Of course, Ms. Spencer, she smiled. Is there something you wanted to discuss? Just call me Angela. Yes, I did. I know you're Arthur's granddaughter, and I'm honored to have worked side by side with his family. He was a great man. Jessica felt a twinge inside at the memory of her grandfather. Thank you. I'm proud of him, too. I've noticed that not everyone here is sincere about you, Angela continued in a quieter tone. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe they think you've come by proxy. But I see that you are trying, studying materials, staying late in the evenings. I respect such purposeful employees. Thank you, Angela. Your support is very important to me. I really want to get into practice and help the company. That's great. If you have any questions about any projects, I'm always in touch. Angela stood up, smiled, and headed for the exit. Jessica looked at her and suddenly thought, maybe she'll be the person with whom we can stand up to the insidious plans. Everything changed, however, when Calloway himself came into view. At the end of the day, he summoned Jessica to his office to discuss the progress of the internship. I hear you're having some trouble with your paperwork, Jessica, he said as soon as she entered the office. Barbara from HR can't get through to you. Problems? The girl was surprised. I haven't gotten anything in the mail or messengers. That's odd. Maybe it's a glitch, but we need to solve everything today. Otherwise, tomorrow HR will raise a fuss that you work officially, but there are no documents. Of course, I'll contact them right away. Thank you for the heads up, Mr. Calloway. One more thing. He paused, looking her carefully in the eye. How do you like working under Fallon? Do you feel like you belong? Yes, of course. I like marketing, plus Eric's a good mentor. He's strict, but it helps me focus. Calloway pressed his lips together as if thinking about something important. That's good. I hope everything works out for you. Jessica didn't immediately realize why his last remark had sounded so strained, but she smiled politely and left the office. As soon as she stepped out into the hallway, she noticed a cleaning lady who looked slightly familiar, but she didn't pay much attention to it. The conversation Sandy overheard was brief, but the sarcasm Calloway sounded did not leave Adeline indifferent. She could see that he was treating Jessica kindly, but at the same time some insincerity was evident. Perhaps it is he who is making plans to siphon the profits from the girl. In the evening, when the employees were going home, Adeline decided that it was time to get more active. She called from her personal phone one of her father's old friends, Walter Higgins, an experienced auditor who Arthur Stone once trusted to check the company's finances. Walter, hi. It's Adeline. I really need your help. The auditor was genuinely pleased to receive the call, though surprised. "Ms. Stone, I haven't heard your voice in a while. What's the matter?" "Because there may be something wrong with our company. I need you to do an informal review of some documents and give me the results. But please, it's strictly confidential." "Okay," he replied cautiously. "What kind of documents are you interested in? Payrolls, reports on marketing expenses, lists of contractors receiving large sums of money? I'd like to see if any of them are fictitious transactions. I'll look into it. But you be careful, Ms. Stone. If someone's really running a scam, they might not be happy about the scrutiny." "I know, Walter. Thank you." Finished talking, Adeline nervously clutched the phone in her hands. This was her first real action toward exposing the malfeasance within the company. If shenanigans really existed, she would have proof soon. If not, then she would have to find other ways to uncover the identity of the person threatening Jessica. 4 days later, Walter Higgins reported that he had collected some data and was ready to meet with her in person. Adeline made an appointment at a small restaurant on the outskirts of Boston to avoid unnecessary attention. She was already there at 6 in the evening, looking forward to seeing an old acquaintance of her father's. When Walter walked in, his tall, lean silhouette was easily recognizable even in the semi-dark room. He approached the table and they embraced like longtime family friends. "It's good to see you, Adeline," he said, taking a seat. "I'm sorry for the loss of your father. He was a great man." "Thank you, Walter. Sit down. Let's get right to it. What did you find out?" He pulled a few pages out of a worn leather folder and spread them out on the table. "I checked the transactions related to the marketing initiatives you asked for, and found some strange overlaps with a third-party company out of Chicago. I believe it's called Smart Horizon LLC. What's suspicious about it? For one thing, it receives regular transfers from Stone & Company with the wording consulting services. But I couldn't find any contract in the official registry that would show they are authorized to do such consulting. Secondly, the sums are too large, and they are increasing. Every month, the fees increased by 10%. Who signed these transfers? Judging by the signatures in the electronic form, it was either the finance department or the marketing director. That is, Eric Fallon. CEO approval is also required. And I see Mr. Calloway's digital signature is on there this year." Adeline looked at the documents, feeling the blood run cold in her veins. "So, both Calloway and Fallon could be in on it. That's a lot of money." "Exactly. And I'm afraid it's not just a mistake. It looks like someone's leaking money under the guise of fictitious contracts. My father was always careful with these deals. Did they start cheating after he died?" "They probably did. Perhaps when they realized you were in no hurry to take over." Adeline clenched her fists, trying to pull herself together. "Walter, this is very serious. I need proof that I can present to the board of shareholders and, if necessary, to the police." "I understand. It's just rough data for now, but I can prepare a fuller report. It'll take time to compile a spreadsheet and cross-reference all the transactions. I'll pay for your services. Just do it quietly and as soon as possible." "Done," Walter replied, tucking the papers back into the folder. "Just please be careful. If Calloway or Fallon find out about your investigation, they could take dangerous steps." "I recognize the risk." Adeline nodded briefly. "Thank you, Walter." She bid him farewell, mentally going over her plan of action. Her hunch that Calloway was the prime suspect was confirmed. But Fallon's part of the game, and he was the man Jessica worked for. The next day, dressed again in her sandy uniform, Adeline went to the office with even more determination. She was wiping down the tables on one of the floors when she noticed Eric Fallon coming out of the conference room, holding the phone to his ear and talking in a low voice. "Yes, I'll transmit the documents." "No, not electronically. I'd rather do it in person. Of course, you do realize it's too dangerous." He stopped talking when he saw the cleaning lady a few steps away. Adeline pretended to focus on her rag. She tilted her head slightly, listening intently, but she couldn't make out any further words as Eric hurried toward the elevator. That same day, toward evening, Jessica stopped by Eric's office to discuss the presentation. As she was checking her laptop, She was telling him about the market statistics, but suddenly she noticed that the manager was looking at her with an overly appraising gaze. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah, sorry." Fallon smiled, ignoring her question. "I just remembered your grandfather telling me, Eric, in this company, it's up to the family to know their roots and appreciate the hard work of each and every employee. That's exactly what you are, isn't it, Jessica?" "I want to be like that," she answered uncertainly. "I've always loved the spirit of Stone and Company, the way Grandpa put people first." "That's great," Fallon returned to the paperwork. "Then we'll make it work." Jessica left the office in confusion. She was flattered that Fallon remembered her grandfather, but his behavior seemed tense and strange. Perhaps he was just nervous about the upcoming report meeting. Meanwhile, Sandy saw Joshua Calloway having a lively conversation with Barbara Jones outside the elevator. They were clearly discussing Jessica and occasionally glanced at the marketing department. Adeline couldn't hear the words, but she felt her insides clench with a premonition of trouble. In the evening, when most of the employees had gone, Adeline sneaked into the finance department. As she was cleaning up, she saw a light on in one of the offices. As she got closer, she heard voices. "If she keeps prying into these financial records, we can't keep hiding the transfers. I'll find a way to suspend her." It was two men speaking. One was the CFO, Robert Lewis. The other she didn't recognize. Her heart skipped a beat. They're definitely hiding something. Perhaps discussing me? But suddenly the phone rang in the hallway. The night guard on duty wanted to know if the cleaning lady had forgotten to close one of the doors. Adeline was forced to answer it, and the conversation in the office was interrupted. When she returned to the door, there was no one inside. "I'm doomed to only scraps of conversation," she thought bitterly. "It's time to act decisively and bring these people out into the open." The next day, the company received official notification that the shareholders' meeting would be held in a week. Calloway had started an extensive correspondence with the top managers, preparing to demonstrate the success of Stone and Company. Adeline realized that this was the perfect moment to strike back and present evidence of fraud. A few days before the board, Walter Higgins handed her the final report, and she, in turn, arranged a secret meeting with Angela Spencer. They agreed that Angela was willing to hear the truth and help. That evening, in the empty conference room, when the staff had already left, Adeline, still in her Sandy character, closed the door, took off her wig, and looked into Angela's astonished eyes. "What? Ms. Stone?" Angela recoiled. "You've been here all this time?" "Quiet," Adeline whispered. "I trust you, so I'm telling you the truth. Not a word to anyone." Angela nodded, stunned. Adeline briefly recounted how she'd disguised herself to understand the state of affairs at the company and handed her Walter's report. "Oh my God." Angela could only mumble as she looked through the documents. "If this is true, we're dealing with a massive embezzlement, and it looks like Calloway and Fallon know about it. I can't let them continue to destroy my father's legacy. Besides, I suspect they want to use my daughter." "Your daughter? Jessica? In what way?" "Perhaps they intend to frame or manipulate her to cover up their schemes. I don't know all the details, but I'm sure she's a key part of their plan." Angela covered her face with her hands, trying to comprehend what she was hearing. Then she looked up, her eyes full of determination. "I'm with you, Adeline. We need to bring them out in front of the shareholder board. The question is how to present the evidence. If we just come in and accuse them, they might deny it. I have an official report from an auditor my father knew and appreciated. Copies of payment orders, itemization. I think that's enough. But I want to make it so Calloway can't get away with it. I suggest we prepare a full presentation and go in front of all the shareholders," Angela suggested. "And it's better if you present yourself not as a secret sire, but as a true mistress." "Exactly. On the day of the board, I'll reveal my identity officially and take control." And so it was decided. The following days passed in feverish preparation. Angela helped select the most important facts from Walter's report and put together a short but compelling presentation. Meanwhile, Adeline informed Jessica that she needed to talk urgently, but only in private and only outside the office. They met at a coffee shop in downtown Boston. Jessica was surprised to see her mother arrive with a large envelope in hand. "Mom, what's going on? You've been missing. I was worried." "I'm sorry, Jess. I did what I had to do to protect you and our company." Protect? From who? And then Adeline began to tell the whole story, how she'd been checking on the employees under the guise of a cleaning lady, what she'd learned and what she planned to do at the shareholders' meeting. Jessica listened with her eyes wide open. "I can't believe it. So you were there the whole time?" "Yes. And I've heard that someone wants to squeeze you for all you're worth. I suspect it's either Calloway or Fallon or both. They might think that you, as an heiress, have information or can sign the right papers without knowing the consequences." "This is monstrous," Jessica whispered. "We have to tell the board of shareholders. In fact, that's what we're going to do. Angela Spencer is helping me compile the evidence into a presentation. Mom, I'm with you." They sat over the paperwork for about an hour until they had their strategy completely clear. Jessica was to speak first. She would talk about her internship experience and the unhealthy atmosphere, hinting at strange orders from the management. Then Angela would take the floor, demonstrating analytics and insinuating that Smart Horizon LLC was a fictitious company. And only then, at the climax, did Adeline take the stage, ready to present the official data and announce her return. The day of the shareholder board came quickly. In the morning, minority and majority shareholders, members of management, and a few invited journalists from business publications gathered in a large conference room. Calloway opened the meeting, briefly reported on the successful performance, and led the shareholders to believe that a minor management reshuffle was needed. But just as he was getting to the point that Ms. Stone's daughter is too green for serious work, Angela Spencer rose. "Please have the floor," she said. "I have something to tell the distinguished audience." Calloway frowned, but nodded, trying to look gracious. Angela turned on the presentation. Graphs of figures, marketing costs, consulting fees. At first it looked respectable, but then anomalous numbers began to surface. Inflated invoices, transfers to Smart Horizon LLC. The audience got excited, and Calloway furrowed his brow. "What are those numbers?" He tossed them in Angela's direction. "Are you exaggerating?" "Not at all," she replied calmly. "All the figures are from our own accounts." Several shareholders began to murmur. Someone demanded an explanation. And then Jessica spoke, standing up from the front row. "I'm Jessica Stone. I'm a marketing intern here. And during my time here, I encountered some strange attitudes and some closed projects that weren't talked about publicly. Maybe I was too naive to notice everything. But now I see that someone has used my position as heiress for their own ends." "What do you mean?" one of the shareholders asked loudly. "I mean that at one point I almost signed the renewal papers with Smart Horizon LLC. I trusted the management, and it turned out that..." She stopped talking, looking at Angela, who nodded and turned on the last slide of the presentation. That one showed Smart Horizon LLC's lack of real activity and a comparison of payment amounts. "Was that it?" Calloway muttered with irritation. "You're making this look like the crime of the century, even though it may be legitimate consulting. Show me proof that it's bogus." He was clearly getting nervous. And then a confident voice came from the audience. "The proof is here." Angela opened the way to the podium, and Adeline Stone entered the hall in an elegant business suit, without a wig, with her head held high. Her appearance had a bombshell effect. The shareholders rose from their seats. Some clapped, some murmured. Calloway turned pale, and Fallon, seated on his right, lowered his gaze. "Minus Ms. Stone." Calloway squeezed out. You've been all this time." Adeline looked him in the eye. "Yes, I have been in the company, Mr. Calloway, but not as an heiress, as a janitor. I was observing and gathering facts. Here's the official audit report proving that Smart Horizon LLC is a shell company siphoning money out of Stone and Company's budget. Your signatures are on it." She spread the papers out on the podium table. Several shareholders stepped forward to get their hands on the documents. "This is," one of them muttered, leafing through the report. "It's millions of dollars." "Yes, millions," Adeline said firmly. "Money that could have been used for the development of our projects, employee bonuses, new jobs. But instead, it was going nowhere." Calloway realized the situation was getting out of control. He tried to justify himself. "Ms. Stone, perhaps you don't understand the nuances. There are many legal schemes." "It's not just schemes. It's a crime," Angela interrupted him. "I know your MO, Mr. Calloway. You cleverly used Arthur Stone's name when you signed the first contracts." Fallon jumped up from his seat, trying to suggest to the audience that he had nothing to do with it. "I didn't know. I was forced to sign." Shareholders continued to indignantly discuss what they had heard. Some started taking pictures of the documents on their phones. Some demanded to call lawyers. Minus Ms. Stone, one of the oldest shareholders, Mr. Grant, addressed her. "Do you intend to take a seat on the board and decide what comes next?" Adeline smiled slightly. "Yes, I came to Boston for that very purpose. I am announcing that from now on I am taking over the reins of the board as my father willed." There was applause. Even those who had been confused at first realized that only a legitimate heiress could bring order back to the company. Calloway and Fallon, pale as a sheet, tried to get out of it, but the shareholders demanded their immediate removal, and some were already calling lawyers and law enforcement. There was an uproar in the room, and Adeline was grateful to Angela, who directed people to the exit in an orderly fashion, suggesting that everyone calm down and wait for the official investigation. When the hall was almost empty, only Jessica, Angela, and a few of the most loyal employees, including the financier Walter Higgins, remained. They surrounded Adeline. "You've done well, Ms. Stone," Walter said, shaking her hand. "It's a pity that you had to return to management under unpleasant circumstances, but you did the right thing." "You deserve the credit for that, Walter. Without your reports, there would not have been such a powerful blow to these crooks." "Mom," Jessica hugged her, "I'm so proud of you, and I'm glad you're here now, in charge." Adeline pulled her daughter close to her. "I promised your grandfather not to abandon the family business, even when it was scary. My duty to my father is done, but there's still a lot of work to be done." "Let's start by restoring our reputation," Angela encouraged them. "In the next few weeks, we need to notify the partners, conduct an audit, and expand the HR department so that such frauds will not happen again." "I agree. And if you don't mind, Angela, I'd like to see you in a higher position. Your professionalism and dedication to the company are obvious." Angela didn't hide her smile. "I'm ready." They walked outside to the steps of the office. There was a sharp wind in the air, but sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Jessica waved goodbye to the others and hugged her mother. "So now we have a new chapter in the history of Stone and Company ahead of us?" she asked. "Yes, Jess, and we're going to write it ourselves, without secret plots or manipulation," Adeline replied. They both smiled. Despite their fatigue and stress, they were relieved that the truth had prevailed, the traitors had been exposed, and the family company was finally in good hands.